Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. Today, I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, founding partner of Key Investment Partners, and I am very excited to be joined by my friend, Matt Balaker. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Matt is also the host of his own podcast, which I've been fortunate enough to make a couple appearances on. So excited to return the favor and talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the cannabis industry.
Well, I'm honored, and I think, to be clear to listeners out there, Jordan, you're the first repeat guest on the Matt Balaker podcast. So that means, like, for every 2 appearances you make, I get at least 1. So I think that's the tip for tat we're playing. You've been very generous with your time, and I got into the cannabis industry in 2012 when I was running a small hedge fund, and I had a string of probably about 2, maybe 3 years of strong returns. So therefore, I knew everything, and it was time for me to become a leader, or so I thought, in cannabis.
in the mature days of 2012, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was in my early 30s, I guess. So I knew everything, as I said, and I managed a fund, and it was kind of sad how it ended. The gentleman who launched it, his wife had terminal cancer, and so it's for very good reasons we stopped, making investments in public companies. But it was around that time I was about to be a father, kind of bored, with a lot of traditional financial work. And I got in touch with Justin Hartfield, who was the founder of Weed Maps. And because I'd been running a fund, there was some talk that they might launch a cannabis fund, and I was totally unqualified for it. I thought I was, Jordan, but I met with him, and we kind of became friends. They never launched the fund. He was too busy making gobs of money on his regular business. But that's kind of what got me into the cannabis as an investor.
Got it. Yeah. So talk to me about what those early days of investing in the cannabis industry were like.
It was the Wild West. I mean, we say it's the Wild West now, Jordan, but I mean, this was the time Colorado had just gone legal. Oregon as well, I think. So although I grew up in California, so in 1996, medical cannabis was legal. So to me, it had seemed like a long time, but there were a few dominant players. It was in some ways easier. I mean, like, everything was medical in California, so there were fewer hoops, I think, to go. You could get product more easily. You had to be a patient. I think there was a lot of camaraderie, which there still is, but it was really fun, and there was so much exuberance. But also, it was like like, I'm a father, so it was kind of like when my kids were like 2 years old. They're slowly starting to walk, but still dirtying their diapers all the time, peeing, like just doing kind of like infantile stuff, because it wasn't really a mature industry. So it was kind of like the terrible twos of cannabis.
That's funny. So then how did your role and responsibility in the industry develop as the industry matured?
Well, I've still not matured, and my responsibility is slightly grown. I think now I'll be dead honest. It forced me, Jordan, to actually learn the business. I thought, because I knew a little bit about several industries, working in hedge funds for about 10 years, that I could just quickly apply that knowledge to cannabis. And there was some carryover. I mean, if you can read a balance sheet for a biotech company, you can read a balance sheet for a cannabis company. But I had no idea how fragmented the industry was, and I just really didn't know it. Around that time, I got my own rec card. I was unfortunately kind of a product of the DARE generation. And so, for worse, I really kind of shied away from cannabis recreationally when I was younger. That changed when I became a parent, and I wanted to sleep, and I didn't want to take any over-the-counter stuff. I always had kind of chronic sleep problems. So this is a long-winded way of saying I needed to kind of understand it at the consumer and social level long before I could understand it from the business level.
Got it. That makes sense. So how did you start to get to know it from the consumer and social level?
Well, I got a rec card, and it was surprisingly easy. I was honest. I said I had insomnia. I don't think they really cared. I could have said, I'm missing an arm, and they would have written me a card, I think. But like it had made me appreciate the lack of hangovers and kind of like a lot of the problems that and I still drink alcohol, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to do what I don't like, Jordan, when I vilify alcohol to bring up cannabis. I think as adults, people should be able to choose to do whatever, put whatever they want in their bodies. Sure. But, when I was in college, I wasn't like a booze hound, but, sometimes I got hungover and I'd throw up. That never happened with cannabis. And especially because I was a dad, I wanted to just quickly be able to fall asleep and wake up and feel good because I had a baby to raise and my wife was working and I was at home and I was still working, but I had a little more flexibility. So it made me appreciate kind of the lack of real serious side effects. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. So if someone's out there, I'm sure there are some side effects, but compared to like a young man in your 20s, I made me think like, gosh, if more people substituted cannabis for other drugs, we'd live in a lot more peaceful world. And that sounds hokey, but I believe it to my core.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you don't see people getting high and starting bar fights and getting violent with their spouses and their kids.
No.
And that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, fast forward several years, I was at I think it was an Orange County commerce meeting, and they had a gentleman from the police department. And in some ways, Orange County was ahead of the curve with legal cannabis. And in many ways, and this is California, not Florida, it's way behind. Like it was hyper fragmented in terms of one city can have a dispensary. And even though 90% of the citizens want it, because the city council says no, it's no. So it was kind of, this was a big time. It was an opportunity for business people to meet with city administrators. I don't want to call them leaders, I call them administrators because I think that's what they are. And one of the administrators mentioned that in the last, call it 3 years, they had 50 calls for domestic violence related to alcohol and other drugs. And I'm not, I don't know if it was exactly 50, but it was a big number. During that same time, there were 0 calls for cannabis-related domestic violence incidences, and I was just like, oh my God! Like, I was already converted, but from just like a crime mitigation standpoint, I was like, what more evidence do you need? I mean that's kind of anecdotal, but I was just like, good God, like that was kind of a light bulb moment where I was like proud to be on the side of legal cannabis. That more so than any business stuff. I mean, if we can stop people from hurting one another, let's do it. Like, let's get me on that team.
Totally. And it gets into, some of the stuff we've talked about on your podcast before, just around why was cannabis made illegal in the first place, right? It had nothing to do with the pharmacological effects of the drug or its potential for addiction, right? It all had to do with political agendas and helping to direct which mind-altering substances we have control over versus which are pushed to the black markets in a sense.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned, pushing things to the black market because, people like to alter their consciousness, and we can talk all day like you should or shouldn't. And there might be arguments for certain people why they shouldn't. I'm not here to dispute that. What I am here to say is people have been getting high long before I was alive. They're going to be getting high for millennia after I pass on. And we have to decide, do we want it to be in the light or do we want it to be in the illicit market? Because it's not going away. It's not as if we make something illegal, people aren't going to use it. It's like, what is the best way, while imperfect, to handle this demand that will always be here?
Right. I think you're spot on with that. And also not just getting high, getting drunk too. And I think there's even like a debate amongst archaeologists around which was the first crop that was cultivated, right? Was it wheat or was it beer? But I mean, the fact that
and did wheat exist for beer?
Yeah. Exactly. So it's like to expect that humans are going to stop experimenting with altering their consciousness, right? And then it gets into the whole idea of where do you draw that line, right? Because sugar certainly has a lot of pharmacological effects, and I would argue that's much more poisonous than cannabis is. So, it just kind of, I think it just the whole dialogue around what is drug, what is medicine, what is food. I think we need to really think through that, have a real kind of come to Jesus moment as
Yeah,
a society.
100%. And I know you're humble, but you've been a major leader on this, and you've changed my mind, in that, like, I think I was maybe a little bit more skeptical, or maybe more trusting of kind of science. And I'm not to say like I'm anti-science. I think, like anything, any human construct, it has its biases. It's formed by people, and people are imperfect. Even ones that work at Key Investment Partner, even though they're the closest, but it's like we put such trust in these labels, like what is food, what is drug, what is a controlled substance, and I think the lines are actually blurrier, and it was harder for me to accept that, because in a way it's just easier if you have these simple categorizations. But you've been a leader, and your whole team has been a leader, and kind of changing the landscape of that, and you're doing it with what you put out there socially, but also with your investments. And I think kind of partnering the two, like, if you can marry something you're passionate about with something that you can hopefully make a living on, it's going to be a very fulfilling existence.
Well, I appreciate that, Matt. And, we definitely try to push the ball forward, not just on the, economic side of the industry, but also on the restorative justice. And it's a challenge, right? I mean, you think about the landscape of what makes an investment a successful venture, right? It's, it's, do you have significant barriers to entry? Do you have scale? Do you have a management team that's been successful in the past? Do you have a clear exit pathway likely to a consolidator, from outside the cannabis industry, right? And it's like all those traits I've listed are not opportunities that are going to be presented to someone, for example, who's been incarcerated for the last several decades due to cannabis.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it sounds so obvious, but it's true. And so it's like, it's hard enough, even if you have all those things I just mentioned, to make a successful cannabis business, let alone if you have no financial acumen or higher education. So it's a real problem. And I think it gets to really, frankly, the structure of the entire economic system. And I think the problem is that, we've been sold this bill of free market capitalism, but I think we need to recognize that A, that's not what we have, and B, even if that were, is operating a business solely for the maximization of your shareholder earnings, is that really the best way to run a society, right? Is this mindset of we have to just continue to grow and grow and grow? Is that why can't we get to a place of where your company is at an equilibrium, you're making a healthy profit for your owners and your employees, and you're supplying the appropriate amount of demand? Why does there always need to be this constant growth and consumerism?
Yeah, I mean, it's I can't show you, but I have a book by probably my favorite economist, Milton Friedman. So in many ways, I'm a proud free market capitalist, but I agree with what you said. We're not in a free market. I'd like to see one someday. Maybe theoretically, like it would be kind of interesting, but we are far from it. I mean, I think we have a freer market than many industrialized countries, but there's still elements of command and control. There's cronyism, there's corporatism, meaning that, like, I'll look at someone like Amazon, which 15 years ago was kind of a darling of the tech world. And I'm a big Amazon consumer. I have no like philosophical issue with them. But when I see them advocating strongly for like very high minimum wage laws or very, strict hiring practices, I'm kind of like, well, is that what you want in your soul? Or are you closing the door to the next Amazon because they don't have the financial resources you do? And I think it's a long-winded way of saying, Jordan, like, cannabis companies are at such a disadvantage. And like you're talking about growth and meeting healthy profits. I just want to see profits at this point, and then we can kind of nitpick over like, what is the optimal amount of profit? And I think the goal of a lot of businesses is to, you want to stay in business, but you want to do so in a way where you're going to come back to work the next morning. And I think with cannabis operators, there's a huge social component to that. And I don't want that to change. Like, I want people to have a purpose beyond the bottom line. And I think once you do that, the bottom line will take care of itself. But like you've alluded to this in work you've done, cannabis it's there's so many barriers that other industries don't have that I can't wait till it's on par with wheat, for instance, or grains, or like paper clips. I don't know, name an industry. I can't wait till it's more on equal footing with that.
I agree. And I think once 280E's gone, that'll help a lot, right? I think that has been such a burden to these folks. It's just made it, nearly impossible to be profitable, even if you are a really excellent operator. So,
Right.
I hope that our government, starts to recognize how big of an issue it is. It's like you can't have your foot in both doors, right?
No, and they listen to this podcast. I mean, probably more so than mine. So, like, just do what we're suggesting, government, please. Your constituents will be better off, I promise.
Mr. McConnell, you heard
yes.
it here first.
Take notes. Take notes, Mitch.
So Matt, how has your involvement over the last couple of years in the industry evolved? And tell me about how you decided to start the Matt Balaker podcast.
Okay, yeah, they're kind of related. Over the last few years, I made some investments. I've had a lot more profitable returns than my recent cannabis investments, but I'm a firm believer you learn more from losses than you do gains. So I've learned a lot, Jordan. And I have friends who were involved in a distribution company, and I helped them kind of build up what they're doing. And then fast forward a couple years, I joined a group at Aureata Capital Partners that helps companies raise money, and they had a big presence in cannabis. And I think that was the reason I joined them. And then you asked about the podcast. Well, during that time when I was kind of looking to invest, inevitably you make friends and then you kind of lend your expertise to them. I met a lot of cool people. I think that's how I met you and Pete. And since then I've met Tibby. And so I had this large Rolodex of cannabis operators, cannabis experts. I can't believe I forgot this. I worked for a consulting firm that helped people staff CFOs and controllers. So it was very kind of brass tacks when it comes to business. And I had this group of people that I was like, they need a story. I want to build a platform for them. So it's not cannabis exclusive, but I'd say 30 to 40% of the content is from, cannabis industry folks.
That makes sense. And what's the other content focus on?
Well, the tagline is we interview leaders in business, comedy, and publishing in hopes of free riding off their expertise. So when I wasn't, pushing paper around for investments, I have a passion, and I've been involved in stand-up comedy for about 20 years as a performer, as a producer. Kind of how in almost any capacity I've done it. So I didn't want to compete with like the Joe Rogans and the Tom Segura's of the world, who had just like a comedy focused podcast. I also had this background in finance, which, gosh, for years I would kind of purposely hide one from the other. Like I kind of wouldn't highlight it to my comedy friends. And then in finance, I thought like, oh, if people realize I did stand up, like my career would be over. Like it was stupid. And then it kind of, when I got into cannabis investing, I felt like, all right, I can be more myself. And now I feel like, all right, I have a pretty unique, I don't want to call it necessarily skill set, but a unique contact base, where I can talk to someone who like recently, the guy who was on America's Got Talent, and he was roasting Simon Cowell. And then, a week before that, I'm talking with you about, revisiting the war on drugs. And it's something that I think is unique because it's what I know. Yeah. And I've learned, it's taken me 20 plus years, Jordan, to realize this, but if you focus on what you know, you'll have a competitive advantage.
Yeah. I love that. And, one of my other favorite podcasters, Tim Ferriss, talks about this idea that there's 8 billion people in the world. To be the best at any one thing is nearly impossible, right? But if you find two things that you're really, really good at and figure out a way to marry those, right, you're unstoppable. And I think that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like 20% away from being unstoppable. Like, but I need to see that summit ahead of me to keep me motivated. Otherwise the view from the top gets boring.
Yeah, but I think also similarly to Rogan, right? Like that's why I think his show has resonated. Like he talks to a very diverse group of people, but all things that he knows deeply and cares very much about, be it comedy, be it MMA, be it, just current events and what have you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because on one hand, in my investment world, I never claimed to be an expert in an industry.
Mm-hmm.
I was good at investments, at structuring investments. And I think podcasting lends itself to curiosity and a willingness. Like, I love having you on because I always learn from you, Jordan. And it's funny because like I could probably just call you and ask you some questions, but for whatever reason, it's just awkward, or I don't do it. Right. But I'm like, oh, come on a podcast. Yeah. I can get a lot of questions answered. I think the main reason is because you're helping others too. It's not, I'm not the only one benefiting from your knowledge, but it's that kind of natural curiosity that I think makes someone like Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss, or even Freakonomics. I love that podcast. Mm-hmm. Just kind of a willingness to say, like, I want to learn more about something. And in 20, 30 minutes, you can get, you're not going to be an expert, but you can get a pretty in-depth discussion on a topic where you otherwise would not know much about.
Yep. I totally agree. I think it's been a great tool as an education platform. So yeah, I'm excited that, it's a medium that we've gotten to be a part of.
And I think just communication, like we've gotten so text focused. I remember when I started my career in the early 2000s, I'd wake up and I'd actually have to go to an office then, and there'd be 6-7 voicemails. And not like I was some huge important person. My boss probably had 20 voicemails. I never had 0. Now I have lots of emails, I have lots of text messages, but I rarely call people. I do, but I think like that's how I met you. I remember I had a question about something I was working on, and I literally cold called you or Pete. I don't remember, but you were super cool. And I think for me, the platform of podcasting is kind of de-evolving in a sense where we can actually look at each other. I mean, it would be better if we were in the same room, Jordan. I think there'd be more like camaraderie, but I feel like I know you better than a lot of people I only text with, or I only email with, or it's only about a transaction. And that has its place, but I kind of miss phone calls. And at the time I hated it. Like I didn't look forward to getting 10 voicemails, but that's how you get to know people. And I think we need to find that balance of auditory communication more so than just, character-based communication.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny you say that. We're working with a new placement agent, and that's one of the things that they were mentioning to us last week when we got together, just about, the some of those old school communication types that have gone out of favor. Well, actually, from a sales perspective, that can really differentiate yourself, right? If you follow up to someone with a phone call, with a handwritten letter, right? Like that's going to really set yourself from the crowd of everyone else who's just, sending a million emails and hoping to get a response.
I can't agree more. I mean, I had an interview on the Matt Balaker podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. Oh, did I just say that? This gentleman named Ron Diamond, who is hugely influential in the family office world. And I didn't know him before the podcast interview. I mean, I think we had like 2 email exchanges, and I asked him, what is kind of your secret for success? Mm-hmm. He said, after almost every meeting I have, I write a letter, a short letter. It could be as simple as thank you, but he'll add a little specific note like, thank you for discussing the beverage opportunity, or I look forward to seeing you next time. I'm in Tennessee or whatever. Uh-huh. And he's been doing that for decades. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Like it's such a simple thing. And I've tried to do it some, I've fallen short, but I mean, maybe now it's a phone call or even an email when everyone texts. It just go think 20 years back. How did they communicate? Yeah. And do that. And like your placement agent says, like that can be a competitive advantage.
Totally. So you're saying we shouldn't be sending subdocs over Snapchat?
I'm saying then followed up with a, you don't have to go full calligraphy, Jordan. I mean, you're artistic. I could see you getting away with it, but maybe write an email that wasn't composed on Chat GPT and something that's actually as simple as saying like, thank you, Jordan, for having me on the podcast. Because I think we all like hearing our name. And so something that is specific to the person. And I think, who said, maybe it was Tim Ferriss or, someone like that. Genuineness, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but honesty is never going to be out of style.
Yeah.
Or sincerity, like when I'm sincerely thankful to be on the show. There's no pretense to that. And I think it's important for me to communicate that to you. And it's important to communicate that to other people who do things that we sincerely appreciate. So I think just recognizing that, and sometimes I get in arguments with my wife, who's much smarter than I am, but sometimes we'll say like, well, that's his job or that's her job. Maybe. Yeah, that can be 100% true. But if someone delivers pizza, I'm still going to say thank you. I'm not like, well, it's your job to do this. So it should be a completely unhuman interaction. I broke my shoulder, and the nurses took great care of me afterwards, and the doctors took great care of me. I made a point to say thank you to them. It was their job. They were compensated handsomely for it, but I still appreciate it. And I'm kind of an a-hole if I don't show some gratitude. So I'm trying to show more gratitude in my life.
That's awesome. And Matt, I can't believe I didn't realize you did stand-up comedy. That's so cool.
A lot of people don't realize that, and I think my career would be better if they did. But that's that's for my therapy session, Jordan, not on this podcast. I do, and I wrote a book about my favorite comedian, who's unfortunately no longer with us, Greg Giraldo. The book, Greg Giraldo, A Comedian Story. Buy it, find retailers or online retailers. And awesome. You don't have to buy it now, but within the next 23 minutes, please buy it.
Yeah. So what was it that attracted you to stand up and to Greg in particular?
I think being a middle child and longing for the approval of strangers is probably what got me into it. If I had, if I was a better athlete, I think I'd have, a better sense of self-worth as a young person. And that wasn't the case. So, I'm always longing for approval. And I think stand-up is, I'm kind of joking, but stand-up is something that can never be perfected. There's always an element of danger. Like, I am terrified of the idea of skydiving. Like, it's just not for me. Like, if it's life or death, I guess I'll do it. But for me, when I started stand-up, it was kind of that thrill. Like, that was my skydiving. That was my adrenaline rush. And I realized, I can get publicly humiliated, but I'm not going to physically break bones, and I could deal with that. I'm just a baby when it comes to broken bones, I guess. But it's that idea of there's always something to strive for. There's always and it's a live communication. Like, I don't really like online shows. I'm not as into watching comedy on television or online. But if I'm at a show and I'm seeing someone who's doing really well, or even I'm seeing someone who's working out stuff, or if I'm the one working out stuff, I like that live connection. I think there's kind of a speakeasy quality to it, where it's like, oh, we're the only ones hearing this. Now someone's gonna have a cell phone and probably recording you. But I think at the heart of stand-up, it was like, okay, we're in this room where we can maybe say some things that would get us in trouble outside of this room, but we all realize we're just kind of having fun.
Right. But this is an important point you bring up with the cell phones, right? Because I think a lot of comedy, you got to work out your stuff. Sometimes things cross the line that, you need to see that feedback from a live audience to understand where the line is sometimes. And I think in the cell phone age, it's made stand-up and I'll call it the kind of woke cancel culture, era as well. It's made a lot of these jokes more dangerous. You see a lot of comedians that won't let people, they make people put those phones in those pouches or whatever.
I mean the Comedy Cellar in New York, which has I think 4 shows a day, they now have a policy. You basically put a cell phone in a baggie and they number it and they give it back to you. But someone can still hide it. It's not perfect, but it's kind of, it just speaks to what you're saying. It's like, it's taking something that's kind of insular It's almost like, you're in a classroom where ideally you can be free to make mistakes and have unpopular opinions, learn from your opinions, or just blow off steam.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunately taken that outside of the room. And it's all, I use the analogy like restaurants tend to cook for people at the restaurant. Now it seems like if it's extended to comedy, you have to please people who would never go to that restaurant anyway.
Right.
And I think that's the function of just social media. It's like people will glom onto something Dave Chappelle says. There's a really high chance it's out of context.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not even be a Dave Chappelle fan, and that's fine. You don't have to be. I don't, but then they'll use that to promote their own opinion. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, they're piggybacking off the success of someone else that was creating content that wasn't for them. And I think that's something I don't like. I'm not going to like have a big protest about it, but I mean, I think it's a matter of understanding who is the audience for this. And I'll take it to cannabis in a way. It's like, if you don't want to dab, if you never want to consume the plant, I'm not going to make you. I never will. But like, if someone is enjoying it and they're not harming someone else, like, leave them alone.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it makes me think of one of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quotes. Right? It's the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement, and if he fails, at least fails daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat.
Wow, you're just the king of quotes. So when you came on my podcast, you talked about the controlled substance, that Teddy Roosevelt. You know what you're talking about. Thank you.
Well, Matt, man, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you coming on the show and shooting the shit about cannabis and comedy and all the good stuff going on these days.
Thank you. I'm glad all my begging and pleading and dozens of emails paid off. So you made my day. Thank you, Jordan. No, honestly, I love what you guys are doing. I love what you're about, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Absolutely, Matt. Thanks again, and be in touch here soon.
Thank you.
Take care, brother.
All right. Thank you.